What's going on, everybody? Again, here with a short intro. I just want to say thank you to everybody who got the previous video up to 18k, and we're almost up to 500 subscribers. And honestly, guys, I don't have really anything to say except thank you. I try to always say thank you to you guys every time I start these videos because you guys are the sole reason why I keep doing this. If I didn't see that you guys were enjoying it, then I wouldn't do it. So I'm kind of excited about this video. It's something a little bit different, so I'm not going to dwell on this intro too much. So all in all, thank you guys, and I hope you enjoy this video. I feel that nowadays the term creepypasta has taken on a whole different meaning than what it meant over a decade ago. Today I feel like most things categorized as creepypastas are any internet phenomenon that gets caught in the huge net that is the term creepypasta itself. And anything that is a written story that gets caught up in that huge net is mostly a popular no-sleep story that blew up on Reddit and is now everywhere across the internet. Today, the quote-unquote creepypastas are much more serious, with a heavy emphasis on realism and believability. And they have way more of a serious tone, a stark contrast to the campy and almost, I guess you could say, cheesy tone of the creepypastas that we heard back then. Stories like The Stairs in the Woods, The Back Rooms to a lesser extent, and the works of Trevor Henderson all aim to entice the reader with media and heavy-handed storytelling for these macabre settings, with the intent of engrossing the viewer with these modern-day horror stories. I feel that the rise of analog horror and found footage and even some ARG are a testament to this newer movement of internet modern horror. You can't go 5 minutes on a YouTube binge without running into some sort of VHS horror series or some sort of backrooms lore video. And that's not to take a dig at this new type of horror that we see on the internet. It's merely an evolution of what came before. Some people might even argue that after all these new forms and new strides for this content of creepypastas that we see nowadays, that it has become boring and samey. You can find thousands of analog horror series trying to be unique and original, but at the end of the day, it boils down to who uses the most VHS filters and the creepiest text-to-speech bot. Even the backrooms that popularized liminal spaces and the several versions of core that was birthed from the discovery of this 4chan post has been compared to that of the SCP Foundation, with all the entities and levels it tries to fit into its mythos, where SCP started out with the purpose of being an index for weird and creepy objects, places, and people and creatures. Some feel like it was shoehorned into the backrooms, and there's even been kind of a rift driven between those who prefer the liminal space backrooms and those who prefer the more SCP-esque backrooms. With the comparisons of found footage ARGs to that of the ever popular Marble Hornets and the previously mentioned backrooms compared to that of the SCP Foundation, it really made me think. Even after all these years, despite the new innovations of this web horror, people still linger on the horror of yesteryear. The pictures associated with well-known creepypastas having their sources found, and even their searches still being done to this day. The retelling of these stories being done in a video format like those of Vibing Leaf, and the praise of many of the longer format and well-written creepypastas that more people are reading nowadays, it makes you wonder, what made the old creepypastas so special. So, as I mentioned earlier, the term creepypasta is used more often than not with anything that has a trace of horror in it across the internet. And while this isn't necessarily an incorrect way to use the term, at its root, what does it truly stand for? And where exactly did this term become associated with such stories? The name creepypasta, as a lot of you may already know, is a moniker given to copypastas with a terror-inspired twist to them. Think of those chain emails that threatened you with a ghostly home invader if you didn't send it to five other acquaintances. And later down the line, the term became more associated with someone on the X board that talked about a tall, faceless humanoid wearing a suit in the woods that would stalk people. Or maybe it also got associated with your friend would send you a story about a haunted N64 cartridge. Or maybe that same friend later at school tells you about a lost episode about a cherished childhood show that was just too gruesome to air. All in all, the stories, regardless of quality, theming, or believability, all came from one unanimous spread and source, that being the internet. Stories inspired by crazy theories about your favorite childhood show, the haunted VHS or Game Boy cartridge hiding a secret, or the random image from the internet that later took on a life of its own and became a story that the community went on to read and enjoy. Many of these things we've come to love and cherish about these stories are categorized as classic creepypastas, and all of them have their origins deep within the internet. Many contributions from places like 4chan, which gave rise to many classic stories like the Anasi's Goatman, which I covered here on my channel, so if you want to check that out. Sorry for the shameless plug. Hero Brian, and the SCP Foundation. Notably, the creation of the popular creepypasta character, the Rake, also got its start at 4chan all the way back in 2005. Sites like Something Awful also have their hand in the creepypasta jar, with phenomenons like that of Ted the Caver, the Demon Scourge, Zalgo, and most popular of all, the Slenderman. And besides those examples that I just gave, there are various other independent works from users on the Creepypasta wiki after its creation in 2010. And it's not hard to see why these older stories became blanketed in this term post 2010. The centralized platform from the wiki helped kind of establish them. Ultimately, I feel the difference between a creepypasta now and then was how unique each story was, from using nightmarish entities that could hardly be fathomed to using something as mundane as a video game cartridge as a vehicle to convey horror. And while it may be kind of silly to be afraid of N64 cartridge, I feel no one before had ever thought to use it. Or the nameless VHS or video link that had a cryptic or downright horrifying video attached to it. Well, if we use hindsight, it'll lead us to believe that these were just overused tropes. To me, I feel like it sowed the seeds for the modern fascination of analog horror and many facets of internet spooks. While the word trope can be seen sometimes in a negative connotation, especially for creepypastas, and especially the older ones given the poor writing and the over the top violence and gore, that seems to have little to no substance in the story, and the often mediocre attempts of making the next big video game or lost episode story falls flat. But for the stories that got big and succeeded, and gained popularity and influence, and have gone on to be considered some of the best, the word trope is seen less as a way to denounce a story and more of a way to call them out for being pioneers in the community. Whether it's a video game, a lost episode, or a camping trip, the theming may be similar, but the execution can wildly depend on the one writing it. Stories like Pokemon Spooky Black and The Theater, stories that revolve around haunted or just downright creepy video games, use the trope amazingly. And admittedly, there's some that are bad also. Some like Sonic.exe and its sequels, and also the various EXE game pastas that it went on to inspire and spawn out of the darkest, deepest pits of the Troll Pasta Wiki. But amongst the bad, there will always be good, and despite the Sonic.exe creepypasta not being the best, it certainly did inspire many of the other video game creepypastas we went on to see. But one that comes to mind to me that I feel is wholly underrated is that of My Buddy Sandman, where the game itself has used war as a way to convey the sinister actions committed by Sandman and the other people associated with the game, is way more creepier than me than the game itself being some sort of central horror. And it's thanks to stories like these that introduced me to games like LHD Dream Emulator, a game which a close friend and myself enjoy and still talk about to this day, along with classics like Majora's Mask and Super Mario 64. One could argue creepypastas like Ben Drown, with its chilling and episodic storytelling being brought to us by gameplay recorded from said game by the author, revealing all its paranormal elements, is what went on to inspire modern day video game horror, or even the popular Godzilla NES, providing us with the sentient horror that is Red, leaving it up to the protagonist Zack to bring an end to this virtual embodiment of hate. And if you were to take one cursory glance at today's video game centric horror, you'd see that the inspiration is pretty clear. Series like Petscop and Catastrophe Crow 64 and the every copy of Mario 64's personalized phenomenon has strokes of what has come before it, whether it's the game holding a dark, deep secret within it and only becoming more revealed as the gameplay is progressed, or the game itself being sentient and throwing the player into a spiral of intrigue and sometimes terror, all of which centers around these very unassuming video games. With the popularization of self-recorded ARGs and VHS-styled footage, it's not hard to see the parallels brought back to popular ARG series from back in the day, like that of Marble Hornets, which I mentioned earlier on in the video and have been using some of their footage for the video. But I also feel like ARGs like that of Everyman Hybrid, Tribe 12, and even Candle Cove can be mentioned in the same sentence. And back to Candle Cove, it also aligns with the trope of the lost episode, which I haven't seen expanded on very much as of recent, but the fact that creators like Vibing Leaf are remaking them and reimagining them, not just lost episodes, but also general creepypastas, says that there's still a lot of love for these gruesome episodes that no one's get to see. But on the same topic of ARGs, the creators of Candle Cove, Chris Straub, also went on to make Local 58, which I like to argue is one of the more modern ARGs. But being an earlier predecessor to these ARGs, it went on to inspire the likes of the Mandela Catalog and Gemini Home Entertainment, with its retro format, its unsettling broadcast, and the found footage candid style that not only Local 58 went on to popularize, but also the aforementioned Marble Hornets, Everyman Hybrid, and Tribe 12. And though time has moved on and newer and more interesting series have spawned out, like those of the King Pixels backroom videos, the groundwork was laid on by these early adopters of the creepypasta craze, whose influence went on to be seen today. And honestly, I love to look at these new ARGs with the lens that they were inspired by something they saw a decade ago. And the fact that they were able to take this inspiration and turn it into something original and groundbreaking, for lack of a better term, goes to show that there's this never-ending cycle of inspiration going on between these completely different types of literary devices. And the fact that 5 or 10 years from now, we'll probably see some very impressive ARGs. Goes to show that the ARGs of the early 2000s and 2010s are still respected, and later on, we're going to see ARGs from the late 2010s and 2020s go on to inspire things that might come on for decades to come. And honestly, it's very exciting, and we shouldn't forget where we first started. So I've talked about various creepypastas, not just in this video, but on the channel. And oftentimes they vary in quality. Some of them can be bad and some of them can be very good. And the question that I posed to everybody in the title was, do they still hold up? We've talked about the impact they've had, and we've talked about all the things that have come as a result of the inspirations of these classic creepypastas. But are there any that are actually good? And I like to answer that question with a resounding yes. In the vault of the creepypasta wiki and no sleep, there is some of the best stories that can be considered creepypastas. And just here, I want to label some of the very few that I think are among the best. And there are many, many more, but here's just some that I feel exceed at what they try to do. Whether it's just a regular creepypasta or it's about a video game, it doesn't matter. These are some of the best ones to have ever graced the internet, in my opinion, of course. But without further ado, I'm going to get to it. So, the story of Mr. Widemouth pertains to the protagonist remembering how his family would move around and how one time he got sick with mono. And this is right before a big move. And for those who haven't had mono, I haven't, but apparently it kind of renders you really, really sick, and you have to pretty much be in bed for a long time. And that's what happened to the protagonist here. So, the protagonist, after being in his room, just resting or whatever, encounters this creature called Mr. Widemouth, which kind of looks like a Furby, according to the protagonist. And this creature tries and tries and tries to get the protagonist to hurt himself by juggling knives and even at some point trying to jump out a window. And of course, the main character doesn't go through with any of this stuff, and it ends up frustrating Mr. Widemouth. And one day he just tells him, hey, there's this path I want to take you down, but you're not ready. Either he meant that literally, or he was just trying to coax the kid to follow him, to prove that he was ready. And years later, after the house is burned down and his family moved away, he returns to this place, and he finally goes down that path that Mr. Widemouth had told him about, and it comes to the mouth of a cemetery with tombstones of children. Now, that's the way the story ends. Mr. Widemouth doesn't show up anymore, and the reason why I love this story so much is because none of it is too forced. There's never an indication that Mr. Widemouth is truly real. It could just be a hallucination that the kid had with this mono sickness that he had. And the fact that everything is left so ambiguous just makes it so much more entertaining to read and just speculate over. Nobody knows where Mr. Widemouth came from, and nobody knows if he's the culprit behind all those kids' tombstones. And I know I said I wasn't going to spoil any of these, but this story is so short I could have paraphrased it. But definitely check out an entire reading of it. I feel like it's one of the better ones to come out of that character creepypasta era. And yeah, that's one of the best earlier creepypastas I can think of. So this is one of those no sleep turn creepypasta ones, and to me this is one of the greatest creepypastas ever made, one of, if not the best. And the reason why I like it so much is because it's amazing. I implore anybody who's reading this that hasn't read it to read it or listen to it. So the story is made by an author called Dathan Arbach, if I said that correctly, and it starts off with the protagonist all the way back in kindergarten, tying a letter to a balloon and just sending it out as part of a school project. And while everybody gets these normal responses, he gets these weird Polaroids showing places that he's been before, and some of them were even him and his mother. And this turns into a big stalking kind of ordeal, and it goes on for years. And this stalker goes out of his way to let him know that he is still watching him. And I'm not going to spoil a lot of it because, like I said in the beginning, I'm not going to spoil any of this stuff. There's a lot of scary implications in this story. A lot of people speculate it could be his dad or something like that. And there's even a point where the stalker sends him photos, but his phone is too old to get the photos, and there's always that huge speculation what was the photos. But again, I'm not gonna go into super detail because I don't want to spoil it, but this one is genuinely one of the best ones I've ever heard, and I definitely implore you guys to listen to it. So this is one of the stories that I can actually say genuinely made me sick. And I don't say that lightly. And the reason why I say that is because this story will completely turn your expectations upside down. What people attribute to be a monster in the story turns out to be something much, much worse. And definitely made me feel some type of way whenever it was revealed what was actually going on in the town. And I guess you could say there was monsters in the town, but it definitely starts off as a creature feature, and then it turns into something completely different. I will not spoil this story at all, and I hugely implore you guys to either read it or go listen to it. I even heard Cole Sprouse was on it or something, the guy from The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. So if you like that, check that out. So this is one of those video game creepypastas that I will not shut up about if you know me in person. To me, this is one of the best video game creepypastas, and it deserves the praise that it gets. There is a few hiccups here and there, just within the story itself, but I feel like as a whole, the fact that there's so much media, connected with this one, and the fact that it's written so emotionally is what makes me love it. And the fact that there's, again, a lot of ambiguous elements to it is what makes me ultimately fall in love with it. Because, again, with that close friend that I talked about on the LS Dream emulator part, we talk about it to this day, trying to figure out what that stuff meant and how that stuff correlates. And genuinely, if you want a good video game creepypasta to listen to, check this one out. It's probably one of the best ones, if not the best, but that's up for speculation. And ultimately, if you like emotional storytelling, listen to this one. So this one's kind of hard to explain without giving everything away, but I will say that Return to Oz is a creepypasta that you really have to be paying attention to it when you're listening to it. This story is about the Oz movie that was released by Disney, but there's a point where the author starts merging the movie, what happens in the movie, with stuff that happens in his real life. And it's honestly a very, I don't know how to put it. It's a very kind of harrowing story about things that have happened in this author's life that he mistakes for happening in the movie of the Oz movie. And again, I don't want to say too much because then it'll start kind of spoiling it. But I will say that there's a lot of foreshadowing, I guess, as to what the author is going through. And honestly, it's a very good and very underrated story, and I hugely implore you guys to listen to this one because it is kind of like Borrasca, where it kind of just turns itself on its head once you realize what's going on. So this is one of the better video game creepypastas that I feel doesn't get the praise that it really should. It kind of flew under the radar, and it's different in the sense that it doesn't use the video game as as the actual horror. It doesn't, there's not a ghost in the game. And although it's not the first one, it uses the game more as a confession type of thing. And Sandman is the guy's actual name, apparently, and Sandman hands his classmate, or the protagonist, a floppy disk with the game on it, if I remember correctly. This is way back when. And it's not until he plays it that he starts figuring out that the game is a whole lot more sus than he thought before. And I'm not going to spoil it. You definitely have to read this one. I think it's really good to just turn on in the background and listen. That's the way that I listen to it. And it really makes you think if you've ever played a game that has had, stuff like that snuck into it. So yeah, give that one a listen. It's definitely one of the best. So, in conclusion, what did make these old creepypastas so special? I think the answer to that is absolutely nothing I said in this video. Everything that I said in this video is purely speculative. It shouldn't be taken as fact, and it shouldn't be taken as the truth about what made these things so special. In fact, I feel like whatever your feelings are towards these older types of stories should be the actual conclusion you come up with. For me, the reason that I find these stories so special is because they take me back to a time when things were easier, when I was trying to figure myself out, and when the internet was something that was brand new to me. And the fact that when I listen to these stories, I can almost remember where I was when I heard them goes to show how much they impacted me. And the fact that I can share the same sentiment with close friends of mine, and we can talk about these stories that came out decades ago for hours, just goes to show what actually made them so special. It doesn't matter what me or any other person on the internet has to say. What matters is what you feel about these stories. And I feel like that is the ultimate conclusion for these. Much like anything in life, it really only matters what you think. And there's stories, old stories from this, genre of internet campfire stories that have made me scared to just look out my window, and some that have perplexed me, and even some that have made me shed a tear. And honestly, that goes to show how effective these stories are. And I guess at the end of the day, the reason why these older creepypastas are so special is the connection that people have with them. And honestly, like I said, everything I just said here, people may disagree with, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, what really matters is what you think and what you feel about these stories. And I guess with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm just going to segue the outro to this one. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that you took away something from this video. And I'm not trying to make this super sappy or anything, but it really is something that I want to convey, that these stories are what you guys want them, to be. They can be good, they can be bad, and it's really up to you guys. But on a lighter note, we're almost up to 500 subscribers, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who's watching these videos and who has supported me, and just it's amazing. It really is. And I am at a loss of words when it comes to see how far we've come since then, and I owe it all to you guys. So with all that being said, be careful out there, take care of yourself, and thank you guys.
The Bronze Jade, the Bombay, the Long Day, the Bronze Age, Gerard Way, the Broadway, the Bombay, Upon J. Salon J.